Ever result in any disciplinary action. The is an absolute sham. So take our word for it. We got access to all the Say you're an honorable man. Tell me you're not a member of a criminal organization. Tell me that the power is not violation of the law. That's what you lawyers do. Going to stand up and say he's an honorable man. Who's prepared to stand up and say your wife is more than a gangster's mom? Who's prepared to stand up and say your children are better than the children of mafia thugs?
The justice system. Everything about it seems to fascinate us. All its granite floors, mahogany paneling, and Latinisms. It stirs our interest and imagination. Whether on television, in film, or the printed word, it intrigues us. Yet few things are more dreaded or evoke greater panic than being caught in America's legal system. Most of the mail conveyed a strong belief that the country's legal system is in crisis. There was much finger-pointing about who is to blame. The investigation of this public reaction was assigned to correspondent Ken Magnuson.
It's in the nature of investigations for documentary productions, ones that are as large as and comprehensive as this, to have events take you off the path you've mapped. I was working on an assignment gathering background material for the documentary film Of Gods and Men when the topic of tort reform became a political debate. My research at the time focused on changes in the contemporary American courts over the past 4 decades, the institutional and political mechanisms that have caused those changes. Because tort reform became a banner for political rallies in a number of state legislatures, including Texas, I received the assignment to investigate the issue in depth.
Research into lawsuit abuse and tort reform seemed over almost before it began. Virtually every objective empirical study returned similar results. Professors Thomas Eaton and Susan Tallarico of the University of Georgia published one of the most exhaustive studies we had seen. In their examination of the Georgia court system, they concluded that there is no tort crisis.
This growing body of research indicates that the tort system in operation is much different from the one portrayed in the popular and political rhetoric of tort reform. There is no evidence of an explosion in tort filings, and there are few signs of runaway juries.
We investigated the claims that America has become a more litigious society, but independent studies agree with our data that there has been no explosion in lawsuits, that in fact, most civil litigation has been fairly flat for at least a decade, even showing somewhat of a decline. Some groups, like the Cato Institution, have raised the issue, but like many other groups, they don't advocate the draconian measures proposed by conservative extremists. We became suspicious about the aggressive lobbying methods being used to move these bills through the legislatures. It seemed to suggest that there was something going on behind all of the clamor for tort reform message. And there was.
I guess it's men or men. How do you know that? Well, if you look at the federal lawsuit that we filed, it talks about equality and not discrimination. You cannot take fathers out of children's lives.
While many of our citizens prosper, others doubt the promise, even the justice of our own country.
It was an army outpost in 1849 and became the last major stop on the Chisholm Trail. Known as Cowtown, it is infamously identified with the origins of Hell's Half-Acre. Fort Worth, Texas, would decades later be dubbed Little Chicago because it too is a bastion for organized crime. Once seen as simpleton gangsters by the measures of northern mobsters, Texas criminals would prove more cunning. They would veil their wickedness from the common folk with the romance of the Wild West and the folklore of southwestern chivalry. But the winds of political corruption have changed direction on the prairies of North Texas. Long past are the days of small-time graft and profits from vice on the Jacksboro Highway. Car bombings are replaced by judicial fiats purchased with bribes and enforced by the state. Brown bags give way to clandestine property transfers and offshore accounts. Like cattle in the stockyards of a bygone era, trials and juries are mere commodities in the courts of Texas, bought and sold in the marketplace of judicial chambers, or in a living room of an appellate justice on a Sunday afternoon. If the arbiters of truth and law have abandoned their duties, divested themselves of integrity and honor, if they have forsworn the law of the land and betrayed the public trust, what hope do we have for justice? She found solace in the winter of her life, saving her reflections of 7 decades on canvas. and although her life was now one of simple means, it was productive. Bonnie Jean Larson could still dream, but those dreams would be replaced by nightmares, her solace by torment, and the peace in her world would be consumed by an unrelenting incubus. Victimized by a robbery, her ordeal began as soon as she filed a claim with the corporate giants, Geico Insurance and Travelers Lloyd's of Texas. But these jewels of Warren Buffett's empire refused to make good on a claim against her policy, forcing Ms. Larson into litigation. Her legal challenges and allegations of wrongdoing by insurance investigators and attorneys drew immediate reprisal from the Fort Worth trial judge, Robert John McCoy. Her resources spent by the ordeal, Bonnie Jean can ill afford to return to the safety of her familiar retreats, but must find shelter among the seediest streets, where gamblers, pushers, and pimps once ruled. As the sun sets on her van, Bonnie Jean must use the last glimmer of daylight, preparing for another day of litigation. But Bob McCoy has already gone home to his fashionable neighborhood. As is his habit, he will be there long before 5. In early morning, after waking in her cold van, Ms. Larson returns to the courts. Her intent to pursue an appeal ignited the judge into a fit of rage. He scolded her for using a court rule and demanded to know how she knew of the law, then demanded that she not use that rule again. The judge's fury and public tantrum would not go unnoticed, and the accounts of the incident would initiate an investigation. Researchers for this story began gathering evidence that would track a pattern of felonies and racketeering, of jury tampering, obstruction of justice, falsification of government documents, evidence tampering, conspiracy, misprision of a felony, mail and wire fraud, denial of due process, possibly even making terrorist threats. The penalties could exceed 60 years in prison. Unaware that their actions were being documented, insurance company lawyers and the courts left a trail of evidence that would eventually find its way to a grand jury. The evidence would implicate a trial judge, 7 appellate justices, a number of public officials, and insurance company defense attorneys. With unblushing malevolence and malice, they would, in effect, plot a homicide by fiat that would be cloaked by action from the governor's mansion. At first, it appeared the troubled jurist's problems might be quelled. His crime spared exposure to the light of day. Texas Governor Rick Perry would accommodate the trial judge within weeks of the dilemma. McCoy would ascend to the bench of the Second Court of Appeals through appointment by this governor. He would join the full court and deny the appeal and motions against him. Every member of the appellate court would participate in the concealment of judicial misconduct and the involvement of the district clerk's office with the appellate court in falsifying trial court records. But a month later, inquiries made to confirm McCoy's participation in the appeal review of his own order would be made by this investigation. Within days of this inquiry, a remarkable event would happen that had never occurred since the court's formation in 1891. The appellate court would withdraw its own denial of Larson's appeal, then return the matter to the trial court. And again, help would come from the governor to aid the troubled jurist. The Texas governor would now appoint a lawyer to the trial court bench vacated by McCoy. The new appointment immediately drew this investigation's attention. Governor Perry's replacement for McCoy, David Evans, was being investigated for fixing cases before the judge whose vacancy he was filling. One of Evans' first acts would be to unlawfully separate the indigent plaintiff from her remaining money by overruling the Texas Supreme Court. In essence, he would require the now homeless 76-year-old woman to pay $190 a month, knowing she would no longer be able to afford her life-sustaining heart medication. Again, Bonnie Jean will appeal the unlawful ruling. She will disqualify the entire appellate court, requiring the governor to immediately appoint a disqualification panel for a public hearing, as required by the Texas Constitution. But the governor's office refuses to act. It will take probes into the matter by this investigation to move the governor's council to respond. But the Texas governor, although now aware that Bonnie Jean's life is threatened, refuses to adhere to his required duty with apparent malice aforethought. In the game of American litigation, the avarice of powerful men will find the means to place themselves above the law. There are no limits to their malice, and they will stop at nothing to either advance or conceal their wrongdoings. Like thousands of the elderly that have been preyed upon, she will become another victim in a corporate shell game. This tenacious senior now finds herself in a battle that would trivialize the expression, a David and Goliath story. Now homeless, impoverished at the hands of the court and her adversaries, Bonnie Jean Larson is in a fight for her life. Unknowingly, she has intruded upon one of the most powerful criminal enterprises in Texas. She has confronted the Cowtown Mafia. As the winter approaches, she will face the ice storms of North Texas. If these cruel forces have their way, she will perish, impoverished, hungry, and alone.